A photograph doesn't need words to unsettle you. A woman stands barefoot on a mountain path. On her back, strapped in with a woven cane basket, sits a European man in a suit and a straw hat. It's 1903. What was actually happening in that photograph? Why this question matters. This photograph has been shared and recaptioned many times over the years. Over the years, the photograph has been given different identities and different stories. Some captions describe the man as a British merchant, while others have claimed he was a colonial official or placed the scene in a different setting. The one thing everyone agrees on is the image itself. A European man, comfortably seated, being carried on the back of a local woman along a mountain trail. So before we decide what this photograph means, we have to ask a simpler question. What do we actually know about it? To understand it, we need to go back to a place and a way of life that most people today have never heard of. How they did it. High in the hill regions of the eastern Himalayas, in places like Sikkim, Darjeeling, and the borderlands of West Bengal, the mountains made ordinary travel almost impossible. In many parts of the hill country, roads were narrow, steep, and difficult for wheeled vehicles to use. Local communities developed and refined ways of carrying people and goods through this difficult terrain, using baskets and straps secured to the body. It sounds almost too simple to work, but in these mountains, it did.
These techniques allowed experienced carriers to move heavy loads through steep terrain that was difficult for carts and animals to navigate. And when the terrain made it impossible for the elderly, the sick, or young children to walk, the same baskets and straps could carry a person instead of cargo. It was a practical and highly effective way of moving loads through difficult terrain. Historical accounts from the period describe basket and strap carrying systems like these being used throughout the region, for goods and at times for people who could not make the journey on foot. Which brings us back to the photograph.
Problems and difficulties. Here's where the story becomes genuinely complicated. One widely shared version of the story describes her as a Bengali woman forced to carry her British colonial master. But that claim goes further than the image itself can prove. The image became a symbol, a single frame representing everything unequal, everything extractive about empire. That does not mean colonial India was free of exploitation, far from it, but a broader historical truth cannot automatically tell us what happened in one particular photograph. But when historians actually traced this specific photograph, the story that emerged was more tangled than the caption suggested. One surviving catalog describes the photograph as showing a British merchant being carried by a Sikkimese woman in West Bengal around 1903. But a catalog caption is not the same thing as knowing exactly who these two people were or why the photograph was taken. The identity of the woman remains uncertain. Her name was not preserved with the photograph, and her own account of that moment has not come to us, and that in itself tells its own story. So, which version is true? Honestly, we don't fully know. What's certain is only what the photograph shows, a moment frozen around 1903 involving two people from very different social and cultural worlds. The skill behind the photograph. What the debate around this photograph often overlooks is the skill itself. Carrying loads, and sometimes people, across mountain terrain wasn't a humiliation to the communities who did it. It reflected balance, endurance, and technique that outside visitors simply didn't have. Whatever the circumstances of this particular photograph, carrying people and goods through difficult terrain was a practical form of transport in regions where roads and wheeled vehicles could not easily go. In a landscape without roads, without wheels, without machines, this was survival turned into mastery.
Reflection. What seems inconvenient to us today was simply part of everyday life in these mountains. But it's easy to forget just how differently a single photograph can be understood depending on who is asking the questions.
The woman in this photograph should not be reduced to a symbol. Whatever her circumstances were that day, she was a person with a skill, a life, and a story that the photograph never recorded. Perhaps the most surprising thing about this image isn't the man in the basket at all. It's how much a 100-year-old photograph can still divide us, and how much can be lost when a single frozen moment gets turned into a symbol without anyone stopping to ask what actually happened. The photograph endures because it asks an uncomfortable question and refuses to fully answer it. Was this simply a practical journey? Was it a demonstration? Was there an unequal relationship behind it? The photograph alone cannot tell us, and perhaps that is the most important lesson of all. If you had lived in these mountains in 1903, do you think you could have carried that load? What does it tell us that more than a century later, we still don't know this woman's name? And when you look at an old photograph like this one, how do you decide what story it's really telling? Let us know what you think in the comments below.